Hey, good morning. This is Chaplain Ames. I'm coming at you from JFK Chapel this morning, and I'm really excited that you guys continue to tune into these videos and make worship a priority even though we're not meeting together. I'd like to call to mind, before we get into Matthew chapter 15 for today's text, the sermon that Chaplain Hendricks gave a couple weeks ago when we last met together on Matthew chapter 12 and the conversation we had about the Sabbath, where Jesus was merciful to his disciples as they were walking and they were hungry and they got some food to eat, and the Pharisees seemed to think that maybe that action was wrong and that some kind of justice needed to be served. They needed to be rebuked, but Jesus in his mercy refused to give that, but instead showed them love and compassion. And we were called to be the kind of people who are mindful and merciful of one another as well. And I think that ties in beautifully with Matthew 15 and where we're going today. As we continue to look at the times that Jesus withdrew, as we're in this Lenten season, and we often take time out to be introspective, to spend time in prayer and spiritual disciplines, and just really focus on who it is that we are in Christ and our relationship with him. We see all throughout the scriptures times where Jesus tries pulling away to do that exact same thing. And Matthew 15 is no different. Let's consider for a moment where Jesus' head is at. So let's consider just in the chapter prior, John the Baptist had been beheaded. Jesus, maybe one of closest friend, his beloved cousin, the person that went before him to lay the path for his ministry, the person who baptized Jesus, was beheaded. And certainly Jesus was very grieved in this moment. And we see that this is a time where he pulls away. In fact, pulls away so much that he goes to a different region where there's almost no Jews that would be mindful of who he is or the kind of ministry that he's been going. He goes to a region of Tyre and Sidon, right? The gateway from India, where all the spice and the trade and all these things, this big capital of industry, where almost nobody would be Jewish and they wouldn't know who he was. He goes there to have that time where he can stop and think and reflect. And we immediately see, like so many other times that he tries to withdraw, that he's immediately interrupted in his solitude. This Canaanite woman, someone not a Jew, someone that's not his utmost priority of the king of the Jews, as the people coming to fulfill the covenant that he has with the nation Israel. This Canaanite woman comes up and begs for Jesus' help. And you see the exchange here, and Jesus is eventually gracious to her. Right? So we compare and we contrast the mercy that Jesus gave just a couple chapters ago, and now he's being gracious. He gives to her something that's entirely different than maybe what he's obligated to give. Out of a place of love and compassion, he gives to her. And then we see Jesus retreat, and he goes up to the mountains after he leaves that place, and he goes up on the east side of the lake, right? He had come down from the west side, and he moved through Jewish country. We see the miracle where he fed the 5,000 people, most likely all Jews. He fed those 5,000 that were following him. He came to Sidon and Tyre, and he ministered to this Canaanite woman. And then he moves up to the east side of the lake, staying in mostly non-Jewish country. And we picked this up from several different contextual clues and some different words that are used in this passage. But we see Jesus doing ministry here to Gentiles as well. And we come to a place where Jesus is sitting on the mountain, and several people, it says many people, come to him looking for miracles. And most certainly Jesus would have been well within his rights to say, hey, I'm trying to turn inward here. I need to process the grief that I'm experiencing from losing my beloved cousin. I'm trying to figure out in relationship with God, like, what's going on here, and I just need to take a knee. But instead we see Jesus being gracious. He gives the grace to people. He imparts on them the gift of love, the gift of compassion. He heals many. And then in a repeat of what just happened a couple chapters earlier, the disciples come to Jesus and say, hey, you've got these thousands of people here. They've been with you for days. They're hungry. I think we need to let them go back to the town to get some food. And it's really funny because Jesus would have been well within his right to look at those people and say, hey, you guys are hungry and you need to go take care of your need. But instead, Jesus does something that maybe we wouldn't do. He exercises grace yet again. He says, look, I don't have an obligation to these people who followed me of their own free will. I have no obligation to feed them. And yet he does. Just like he did with the mostly Jewish crowd that was 2 chapters before, he does again with this Gentile crowd now. Out of a place of grace, he opens his arm and fully welcomes in all people. And we see this pattern developing here that that Jesus' love is not just for a certain people, but it's for all people. And so he tells the disciples, hey, gather the food that you've got, and he blesses it. In a foreshadowing kind of event to what we now know as the Last Supper and communion, Jesus breaks bread with not just Jews, but with Gentiles, with all who believe, with all who come to him looking to learn, looking to be loved, looking to share in his story and the story of God. Jesus gives us the greatest example of grace in flesh. He shares this meal with people that by all cultural accounts he should not have. And it makes me reflect on the position that we're in today, where we're not even meeting together because there's stuff going on in our world that puts us at great risk. It's absolutely a time when we can stop and would be well within our right to say, I'm going to turn inward and I'm going to think about myself for a minute because there's stuff going on here that we need to make sure we get right. It's absolutely within our right to stay cloistered away, to say, I'm gonna store up on all of these things to make sure my family is taken care of. And yet we see Jesus in a similar situation, just being gracious, giving to others from his self, being completely poured out, nothing left, exhausted, giving to one another. And my encouragement, my challenge to you today as we look at this story is to think for a moment how we as a community can be gracious to one another in the same way. How can I take from what I have that you don't need, that I'm not obliged to give you? How can I help you? How can I love you? How can I show you the compassion of Christ? I pray that would be on your hearts, that would be on your minds, and that we care for one another during this uncertain time. Thanks for joining us again today. God bless you. You are loved. Hope to see you soon.